that introduction, and to Broward Student Life for sure for funding this program, which allows artists to, get to share their passions with everybody, and then that eventually gets made into a video, and then it's out there, and everyone gets to see a particular point of view from a particular person in each of these. And I think that that's just enriching the world in general. So thank you to them, and certainly thank you to all you lovely people for filling this room, so I'm not just talking to myself in here. That's also helpful. Yeah, we can do that. I just like that to be as crisp as possible.
It's the only option.
All right. So I like this picture of myself because that's kind of how I work. I'm just laser beamed in on what I'm doing. I'm usually working on some kind of finicky detail that becomes very important to me during my process. So that's what I look like when I'm executing whatever it is, the idea that I have just popped in my head. But this is often how I feel in my head about the things I'm interested in. Like I'm lost in a forest and I'm just kind of, bewildered in some ways, but it's a good kind of bewildered. It's not lost completely. It's just, there's so much going on that I appreciate in our world that it's hard to select a steady stream of work sometimes because I want to reflect all of those interests that I have. So I feel like the best way to give you an insight into what I do is to first talk about some of the things that impacted me in my formative years as an artist, and then show you some of the important building blocks I think built up while I got to this point where I am today. This is called a wildlife fact file. Starting in 1991, these started getting circulated as basically a periodical, and it's essentially a categorical database that breaks down a number of creatures residing in various phyla, and there's all kinds of information on there that's useful to somebody who might be interested in animals, and certainly I was. So my mom exposed me to these at a pretty young age. So I was about 6 at the time, and I would wait for these in the mail. They were notorious for not getting there on time, which was frustrating, but when I got them, I was very happy. They'd come in sets of 5 or so, and you'd fill a 3-ring binder, and now I have a bookshelf like that wide filled with files on animals. So from an early age, that was something that was really interesting to me. I loved looking at their anatomy, their skill sets, their behavioral tendencies, their breeding habits, distribution, habitats, all of that stuff I'm a huge nerd for. So it was all there, and they have this lovely did you know area. Let's see, cuttlefish can color 26 cubic yards of water with its ink in a few minutes. I think that's pretty impressive. And it's actually, the ink that it uses has been used in the art world for sepia tones as a rich brown pigment in history, so it comes full circle. And I remember a little anecdote from that time of my life when I was at the hairdresser with my mom. I was getting my hair cut, and I just could not shut up about animals. I was always talking about them, and I recall talking about the blue-footed booby. It's a type of seabird with this striking blue coloration on its feet, and it's just really lovely. You don't see that color oftentimes in birds. And I remember going off about that for a while and how cool they were, and it got reduced to a joke about boobies. And I thought, even at that age, animals deserve more respect than that. Let's not just make fun of their name. I'm talking about something fascinating. The fact that that's evolved to exist and that we've evolved to appreciate that is just astounding. So to me, it was a serious thing from an early age to be concerned with animals and what they could do. And still to this day, when I'm making my daily rounds on the internets, I look at animal news, go to Nat Geo and see what's been discovered, because things are being discovered every week. So that's definitely a boost for my work because those things inform me. So this is an illustration done while attributed to Albertus Saba. He was basically a collector of items, different animals and things like that, plant life, And after he built this huge collection of specimens, he had them all drawn out. And some of these were commissioned based on like a traveling sort of understanding. So you'll see why I point that out in a moment. But at this level, when I'm looking at these drawings, which keep in mind that this isn't moving chronologically necessarily, but how I see it jumping in my mind from one important part to another. So this, I guess, started informing my line quality. The fact that there's a lot of rhythm, it flows very easily. If you're following any of these lines around their curves, that would be a nice smooth road to drive. I don't like jagged lines that much. I like the curvilinear. And here I'm also seeing one of the things I really love about compositions, and that is symmetry, especially bilateral symmetry. I love that Cabinet of Natural Curiosities by Alberta Sava for reasons like this. In there, in no joke whatsoever, it has a hydra as an animal that was cataloged as existing, which is ludicrous to us now, but at the time, moving from the 1700s to the 1800s, there was a lot left to be discovered out there. So I think it could have been plausible in their minds that would exist, but that does not. So some of that fantasy that found its way into this, or creativity on the part of the artist in Sava, really falls in step with what I was interested in when I first saw these. Another book that I really like is Art Forms in Nature by Ernst Haeckel. And here again you see that line I'm talking about is just beautiful and curvaceous, and it doesn't have awkward breaks to it. It flows just like some sort of jellyfish and its tendrils underwater. It just hovers there and it doesn't bend around too much. It's relaxed. It's passive. Lyrical. So here's some of the other animals that I'm interested in, and they come from the deep. Here we've got a simple clam in the upper left. To be honest, I don't even really know what the upper center is. It's some kind of cell of life. We have viperfish, we have dragonfish, we have a goblin shark. All of these rather horrifying and bizarre evolutions of life that are down in the deep, and we still don't know very much about our oceans and what's down there. And I think that possibility of finding something new and exciting is what keeps me going along that biological path of my work. I want to see these new forms of life. Mantids. Are you all making that up clearly? You see what we're looking at? It's camouflaged rather well. Basically, you've got the head up top, and then you have the arms folded in that typical praying position, mantis. But the texture, the color, the way that lines break on the form, all inspire my work to some degree. They're seen as creepy crawlies, and rest assured this is not the extent to which I'm interested in bug life. But these creepy crawlies have just an exquisite amount of beauty in detail to really break them down and look at their form. So I'm always trying to stay in tune with even the smallest life forms and look at, what projects out to larger animals that we already know of, maybe even the way that it could apply to a sculpture that I'm working on. So a lot of people hate snakes, but I look at this and I cannot see anything but beauty in this. The way that you have a gradation from that violet to the yellows and the oranges, it's just lovely. And I mean, even in the eye itself, there's so much just exquisite detail that I think can be looked at and marveled at and used as a source of inspiration for artwork. And I find, or at least I've found throughout most of my life, that I'm far more inspired by the natural world than I am by the art world. I'm looking at these sort of things first before I'm looking at, all of Picasso's catalogs of work or something like that. I prefer to look to natural sources at any level of growth. So these are bats in embryo. So you see what's going on here? Just in time for Halloween, these creepy hands wrapping around. think that should find its way into Hollywood somewhere. It would be rather interesting. So that's just really interesting to me, the way that form works, and then the semi-transparent quality of the skin reminds me of things that can be done in porcelain, which I'll get into ceramics a little bit later. But I look at that and I can draw a lot into my own vocabulary as a sculptor. But I don't only like the creepy, weird monsters of the deep and bugs and all of that. This is Lulu, my family's dog, miniature runt of a miniature dachshund, and I think that she has a fascinating anatomy as well. So, bar none, anatomy and biology are interesting to me. I cannot imagine how much money I made my parents spend on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles action figures. In fact, for reference, I can marvel at this while I'm talking to you. So first of all, I look at a toy, an action figure. Donatello's my favorite. And I see this thing, and yes, it has a lot of implied meaning because of the narratives that are involved with it, but I looked at these figures as a kid and saw the detail in the sculpt. That really fascinated me, and always holding something that was scaled down far larger than whatever its original was supposed to be, I think affected the fact that I work small, oftentimes something that's handheld, something that's precious, and I like all of that little detail that can be carved into it. So even in the 80s, when action figures didn't have the greatest amount of detail, these had enough to get my mind going with it. So that, there's my mascot for the night. That interested me a lot on an artistic level, an aesthetic level, but the idea that was the most interesting to me is right there in the name, mutant. It's about mutation. You watch listen to the show or the comics or any of that, you'll find that this ooze transformed them into these zoomorphized creatures between a turtle and a human. And that idea of, okay, I already think biology is so fascinating on its own. We don't know what's out there really. We haven't, plumbed the depths of the world and the universe and what other life forms we can find. So that's interesting on a second level. And the third level is we can imagine life forms, and we can depict these life forms in artwork. And that is a thought that once it got in my head, it was like Inception. It just ran with it, and that idea's been with me for the whole time. So mutations and the idea of an alternate anatomy is really, I think, at the core of what was influencing me at the time up till about my mid-20s. 1996, there was a video game that was released, and if you were a boy of my age at that time, it was almost like a rite of passage to play video games. It was called Biohazard. It's known as Resident Evil stateside, but I won't address that because America has destroyed that franchise. Let's just say, it's nosedived entirely, but let's think about what's important here. The things that affected me: horrible mutation. So it's halfway between an imagined creature and something that would happen to you if you got Ebola. Then we have, I'm surprised that got laughs. Okay, might be a little too soon, guys. All right, so then there's the laboratory where you have these fleshy, pulpy organisms growing on. You don't know what they are. It seems like it has human intervention to shape it in some way. So that laboratory aesthetic got in at the same time as these further necrotic and blistering figures that emerged from that game series. Does anyone recognize this?
I do. Never-ending Story.
The Never-Ending Story. I bet that I'm the only one in here, or the only one that you know, that owns the Never-Ending Story book, owns an original copy when it got translated from German to English, and I have the DVD, and I have the soundtrack. So when I say that film deeply affected me as a child, it's no joke. And this is what affected me the most. In the film, Atreyu has to go through 2 pairs of sphinxes, and the second one is called the Southern Oracle. So he's passing through this oracle, and their eyes slowly open, these glowing eyes, and they just shoot down, they blow up this knife guy, whatever, the story doesn't matter. It's the form, and I see it now. I didn't see it at the time, but this is the sort of sphinx that you see in Greek mythology and in the symbolist movement in the late 1800s. And I'm seeing a lot of ties to the symbolist movement from my childhood that I couldn't have known without the hindsight that I have at this point. So here we have these beautiful sculpts. There's mysticism involved. There's glowing eyes, which will become important a little bit later on. So here's symbolist work, symbolist artwork from the symbolist movement. This is a piece by Henry Provençal. It's an imagined piece of architecture, and I love it. It takes me to a different place, just like Never-Ending Story took me to a different place. It's a bizarre world where there's things that could happen in our space and time, but don't. It's rooted in reality enough and then rooted in abstraction enough that it's somewhere in between like this. And I think that idea of this other dimension, these alternate possibilities is what lined up with me looking at this piece. And another note about the connection to the Never-Ending Story was that also around that time I was affected by a film called Return to Oz. It was the sequel to The Wizard of Oz. Anyone seen that? It's horrifying. It should not be viewed by children ever. I think it deeply scarred me. It was it had the same vibe as the Never-Ending Story, where there was this sort of terror involved. There was something unsettling about the entire environment, something a little bit dangerous. And I think I remind myself, at least on a daily basis, that the world isn't our plaything. You know, it can bite back. Nature isn't completely benign. There's a lot of bad things that can happen to you out in the natural world. It isn't as pastoral and pleasant as we think. So those are some of the things that came along the line in my thoughts. And this is one of my favorites. It's a piece that it's Bernard Knopf, and what's going on here is we see a city square, and two things are very curious. Water filling in this empty street area. No one's around. We don't really know what the context is for this locale and why water's starting to encroach. It almost has some kind of parallels to global climate change now. But the thing that freaks me out a little bit more in a calm way is that the statue that should be standing on top of that pediment is gone. Like it just got up and walked away. And I don't know what it is about that thought of that permanent thing getting up and moving itself, and it's completely isolated. It's in a state of desolation that really drags me into it. And it's such a simple image, but I find myself looking at this very frequently. Now, we'll look at a few more works by symbolists, because I think I see more than ever connections between my work and that movement. So a little bit about the symbolist movement. And their idea was to objectify the subjective, or in other words, in the words of Listwan, they're making the invisible world visible. So the imagination aspect comes into play. And they tend to get overlooked in history because they don't really have a style that was very different than everything else. And in some ways, they're a continuation of the Romanticism movement. And because of that, they were maybe seen as backward thinking. But their idea if you think about the Impressionists, they're looking at the world that's out there, and they're sort of putting their own mind and their ideas about it, imposing it onto what they see. Here, it's taking what we see outside and then internalizing it and turning it into this realm of symbols. And you'll see some motifs reoccurring here. So we have this kind of spooky mysticism happening, this strange, large idol. It's called Black Idol on the right. And then on the left, we have this cloaked figure walking down this sort of endless row of these apparently sphinxes on some kind of pedestal. And it's very mysterious. You you need to read into it. There's not a lot that's didactic about symbolist works. The femme fatale is a big idea in the symbolist movement. So the female figure as something that's dangerous and powerful. That I also find very intriguing. This piece on the left, Thanatos 1, that is done by Malczewski. And what I find the most interesting about that piece is this old guy in the background. You see him there in the upper right, that image on the left, he's kind of running out. He's running out there because he hears a noise. What's that noise? I'm disturbed by it. I'm going to stop this. Well, it's Thanatos, the god of death, sharpening a scythe, and she's there for him. So there's this strange kind of humor to it, a dark humor, mind you. I don't expect laughs for that. Although on the back of that Ebola thing, maybe I was expecting that. So the femme fatale, again, to an extent, I look at that hair and I'm seeing the lines that I'm in love with. The way that flows is just so lyrical. Gustav Klimt. So this is Death and Life, a very cosmic, universal sort of idea. You've got death portrayed on the left, and then an amalgamation of people on the right that are apparently going to be taken by him with his little itty-bitty club. And the idea here is that they aren't really terrified or sad. They look content with the idea of death. And I think that was a big part of the symbolist movement, is that acceptance of the unknown, the acceptance of the mysterious. So certainly Rodin is one of the big ones that hit me around my high school years. So I saw The Gates of Hell. So this is from Dante's Inferno, the idea of all these different scenes somehow representing the different levels of hell that are shown on the front doors in the entrance. And he didn't finish this in 1917, so the entire project wasn't realized. But there's still so much great information in his works. Now it's claustrophobically packed, which is interesting in some ways, and I take that away, but there's something anatomical about this. And it's not just in the individual figures, it's all of them together as a group. Somehow they blend into one sort of unknown creature in the background. At least that's the weird things I see, and that's how my work is made. I internalize it in that way. To others, you might just recognize the thinker. It's taken from this and made larger for its own self-standing sculpture. So this is something that steps back a little bit. When I was 17, I got the opportunity to go to Europe, and I got to see this very piece, The Winged Victory, at the Louvre. And before I saw it in person, I didn't really understand that there was more to the sculpture than just the female on the top with the wings. I didn't know that there was this ship underneath. She would have also had a laurel crown, and been pretty plain, I think. But the fact that her arms are gone and her head is gone, it takes it away from that context and makes it mysterious. So again, that mystery, that unknown aspect of it, this kind of lost fragment of the past that has just an odd look now. Another thing I saw there, Chateau de Versailles, or Versailles, as it's called. So that's in France. It is the biggest, I guess, center of the Rococo period. It was the Rococo period in a lot of ways. So this palace had so much in it, and if you know anything about the Rococo movement, it was overly embellished to an extreme extent. Like every little thing had to be decorated somehow. And that finicky attention to detail, although a little bit tacky in retrospect, the amount of claustrophobia in it came back with me when I returned from Europe. And I appreciated the Rococo more than a lot of people I knew at the time, they saw it as kind of stuffy and outdated, antique-ish. But I look at this just overall, and some of the lines, oh, you can see the cursor, great. So the curves of the ceiling here, just so much happening sculpturally that you can't understand what it is. It almost looks as if both of these different cathedrals, chapels, they're just moving. There's just movement everywhere, like the walls are crawling with bugs or something like that. Here as well, this is sort of the Rococo style being a little over-embellished. But what I see in this is that fabric not as, okay, well that was well rendered and it's draped over the figure, I understand that. It's the way that the fabric starts to look like it's a part of the anatomy, almost like she's in a cocoon or some kind of a membrane of some sort. And it reminded me of the paintings of Francis Bacon, where there's sort of movement within one's skin, this double layer of things happening, and it's scary to an extent. I think that if you had it actually moving around, and you see a Francis Bacon being moved, it would be terrifying. The same with this. So I saw this as an altered sort of anatomy. Rocaille is the name for this sort of patterning. That's what the Rococo got named after. It's this shell patterning with these curving lines. And I didn't realize it at the time, but that perfectly sums up my interest in line, right there. So in my drawings, which you'll see in a little bit, where the areas where I've got it more tightly packed together, it has a flow very similar to that. So as far as some of the outlook on my work and how I approach what I make or why I think about the things that I do, I think H.P. Lovecraft informed that to an extent. One of the greatest American authors of all time, they lump him in with Edgar Allan Poe, who people are more familiar with. But they're sort of tales of cosmic horror, and they contextualize our place in the universe. So let me just read you a couple of lines that drew me in to Howard Philip Lovecraft's work. In The Call of the Cthulhu, which is his most famous writing, he says, "The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all of its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far." So there's your upbeat quote for the day. A couple other things before I explain why I'm interested in this guy. He describes some of his monstrous creatures, these fictitious anatomies, in these ways. A massive, pulpy, tentacled head surmounted by a grotesque and scaly body with rudimentary wings, looking like an octopus, a dragon, and a human that lumbered slobberingly into sight and gropingly squeezed its gelatinous green immensity out of its tomb. There's just so much delicious wordplay there. You really feel like you're getting bogged down in one of the creatures he's describing. So it wasn't only the creatures he was describing, but also the general outlook that we aren't as important as we think we are in the universe. So let's start looking at this, because I think that Lovecraft was in my head when I was doing some of these works in my undergrad. It was focusing on fungus and how they proliferated on a microscopic level, that moment of the spore bursting open and that emergence that's happening. So you can see there's that lyrical flow through the entire form itself. It's undulating. It's a little bit gross and organ-like. I'll explain these shapes momentarily. So that was the first three in the Biogenesis series, the Biogenesis 1, 2, and 3. I'm not going to show you every single one. It's just that I think that these first three, basically summarize that work the best. It moved into this direction, and if you look at the colors and where they were getting at this point, they were very bright and vibrant, and it makes sense because at the time I was working at a tropical fish store. I was exposed to these bright corals and anemones and fish all the time, And somehow it came home with me and I started coloring in that way, and I didn't like it anymore. It wasn't what I was looking for. So this series kind of shifted away around this point when I tried doing some installation. So this hangs from the ceiling. This is about 6.5 feet tall. This is called fruiting body. It's essentially, if you know what a fungus is, it's mostly under the ground. It's hyphae underneath the surface. The fruiting body is the mushroom that we see, the only thing we can use to identify its presence. And underneath those gills on a mushroom, it ejects spores. That's where they're coming from. And then they litter the ground and more growth occurs. So the idea with this is that there were various areas where spores might erupt from it.
Dan, what are these made out of?
Yes, good question. Sorry about that. This is more things than I can count, including but not limited to actual sausage casing that I picked up from the market, filled with some foam. This is ceramic and mixed media, ceramic, 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 ceramic. And this is before I really thought about the practicality of the weight of ceramic, because this is roughly that tall. So you have to find a pretty sturdy wall on which to hang it. This one is that wide, so rather large. So this is where my work wound up in grad school for a while. I started to think about that science equipment and the housing for whatever the organisms were. This is called genetic chimera 1. It's basically kind of heavy on religious references, especially sort of more formalized Catholic ideas of decoration of objects. And he's basically transforming into an angel-like thing, the idea of creating an angel, that we can genetically engineer creatures at this point. We are becoming our own gods in a certain sense. And that's a huge idea, and it's disturbing, and it's exciting, and a lot of people are divided on what that might mean for the future. But here the idea is that maybe they're trying to put in some kind of bird-like attributes. So this is influenced by the Baroque, the Rococo, science fiction, religion. So it's hitting on a lot of different levels. Tried again to step outside of simply using ceramic. The cap and the base are slip cast porcelain. I'll show you how I did that in a moment. And they're glass cylinders, actual soil. It's a real ecosystem that was functioning. There's critters in there, incidentally, ferns and moss. And then I sculpted these creatures, these sort of Lovecraftian, strange, arcane beings growing out of the soil, and they're sort of slimy and fleshy. And one of them is not there anymore. It's just shattered out, and then this sort of suggestion of it got away somewhere. And I like that idea too. I like the idea of it visually, but the idea of a genetically engineered animal getting out into the world, that's horrifying. That's a totally different thing. So there's a balance between what I would actually like to see and what this is sort of giving you the impression of. So those caps and the bases, the top and the bottom, you see it has that motif of a double helix, only it goes around forever and loops into itself. It's a closed loop, and it's supposed to reference the figure 8, infinity. So these are wheel thrown, for those of you familiar with ceramic processes. So I tooled these down on the wheel. They're mostly solid. Then I went in and was carving that double helix in there painstakingly, because I knew I'd be making a mold of it that I would put in the work once, and then I wouldn't have to worry about it. I could slip cast it again and save myself time. So that's what I was doing here. You see the mold in process. There's the larger one. And then you see the pieces coming off. So the inside you have that void with double helix. So there in the back you see the newly cast ones. See how clean and polished those are. And then you have the prototypes in the front. Note that they are molding because they have been around for a while. So here's another one that I made. Actually, the last one that I made that I used before that mold took an unfortunate tumble. Make sure that your drywall anchors are rated for the weight you're putting on them. That's the lesson of that one. So here, this is actually a piece of meat inside. It's allowing it to kind of go through a natural process of disintegration, filling up that tank. So it was kind of performance in its kind of chamber there. It's doing its own disintegration process. I have one more of those sets that I can make the top and the bottom for, so I'm saving that for a rainy day because I don't want to make those molds again. That took a long time. At this point, I repurposed the cylinder that I used for that genetic chimera, and I tried putting one of my illustrations in there. So this is a decal that I created off an original drawing and then applied to this ceramic cylinder which sits inside. So this is actually the piece that you'll find in 500 Prints and Plate if you're ever in a bookstore and you pick that up for perusing. So again, in grad school, I'm trying different things. Getting out of my comfort zone, so smashing open walls and making it look as if there's some creature growing behind the walls. To some extent, we all have that because mold is usually there. It's just a little bit bigger, a little scarier, a little more formidable. Okay, so this is important. This is the work of Josiah Wedgwood, the Wedgwood Company. It's called Jasperware, and I have such an incredible amount of respect for this work and how much detail is in it. I work in this process now in exactly the same way, and it is hard. It is really hard to get all the detail you see there. The piece on the right is about 3 feet tall. The piece on the left is only about 8 inches tall, and they both have an extreme amount of detail in them. You see the low relief on the sides, which we'll be talking about in the workshop tomorrow. There's also some pot to pot, which is paste on paste. It's working with liquid slip on top of that surface, great semi-transparent surface where it looks like you have depth of field. So I was looking at this work in grad school, and it was just really affecting. I was at the Natural History Museum in Milwaukee for a Christmas break, and that piece on the left was in one of the display cases, and I just couldn't look away. And the format itself, I thought, was perfect for what I wanted to do. Basically, you have these neoclassical figures. They're benign, they're people doing everyday activities, usually dressed up like the Greeks and the Romans. Not much that would shake up the viewer at all. And I just see it as a language. This is a language with which you can tell some kind of a story or give some kind of message. So I thought I might change the form and what's being put on the form, but keep it in the same aesthetics that people are sort of drawn in, and then they realize what it is, a bait and switch in some ways. So a little bit about ceramics and why I do it. I find that the field, more than most others, is more science than a lot of other art practices. Knowing how to formulate your clay body, knowing the chemistry for your glazes, how to fire properly, what's happening to the clay body, how it's physically changing. All of those things have to be understood. It's not something you can really fly by the seat of your pants with if you want to do a detailed job or you want to impose a certain amount of specificity to the form. So it's challenging to me. I like that part about ceramic. I like the fact that it's one of the oldest histories in art that there is. As of last year, shards were found of a 20,000-year-old piece of pottery. And that's one of the earliest tools that we found, because they're stone tools, but those weren't entirely made by the person. Usually they were bits and pieces found that were close enough to a tool that they then altered. We're talking about complete intention from start to finish, digging up the clay, forming it, and then putting it through a firing process. So it's very old. It has a lot of history that you can dig up and revisit. And ceramics is in a strange position. It has been in a strange position because it straddles this line between art and craft. And those debates about art and craft, as far as ceramics goes, as far as glass goes, as far as fiber goes, has changed a lot in recent years, but for most of the 20th century, there was an idea, multiple ideas, but some were to just go to the functional form, the history that's been there. Others thought we need to find the true form of clay, which you may get Volkits, Solder making these really abstract pieces, trying to make it look more like it looks raw. But that's kind of a fallacy because ceramic or clay, before it becomes ceramic, doesn't have a natural state. The clay that you use to sculpt has been processed over and over and over again unless you dug it up yourself. So it's already been altered from its original state. So to me that argument didn't make so much sense. The vessel, well, I appreciate the vessel and I do like to make functional work from time to time, doesn't really satiate my needs as an artist as much as sculptures do. So that's kind of the atmosphere I grew up into and understood with ceramic, and we're not going to get into that whole debate. It would take hours and hours. So it has a confused identity, but I stuck with it anyways because I saw what I was thinking about would fit this form very well. These are the things I am always aware of. You're one person out of 7 billion, on one planet out of 8, in one star system out of 100 billion star systems, and one out of 100 billion galaxies. And the idea that we are sitting there with these things, these devices, we're so wrapped up in them, we're so wrapped up in our Facebook lives, that we don't really understand how precious our life is, how unusual our life is, the fact that we're here at all, and that all these other interesting creatures are around with us. We lose sight of that, and that's okay. From time to time, you got to get away from it, but understanding that the world, the universe doesn't revolve around us is one of the themes here. So this is some of the jasperware I was making, a reference to Wedgwood clearly, where I'm using low relief on top of these forms. So the forms now aren't trinket boxes and vases and tea sets. They're these different sorts of equipment that are used in microbiology, some to kind of a startling application. And I put trigger images on some of them. Skulls are easy to draw parallel between death and scientific exploration there. See Ebola. Then we have the biohazard symbol. This beaker here, we have Yersinia pestis, also known as Black Death. And then some of them are mixes between the invented and the real. So those are I don't depict the heroes and gods of Greek mythology and Roman mythology. What I want to show is the sort of things that we give no respect to for the most part, and they're the things we should really fear and respect. And the other life forms on this planet that could obliterate ours completely. And Ebola is one of those examples right now. We have scary possibilities of what could happen. Around this time, there was an article that was published, and this was during the 2012, in the Annals of Internal Medicine, which is the medical journal of the American College of Physicians, where the article was titled, Engineered H5N1, a Rare Time for Restraint in Science. H5N1 is the avian bird flu, if you remember, there were some scares with that for a while. Here's what it said. Given that ferrets are considered the most reliable animal surrogate for human influenza infection, the newly engineered H5N1 strain is probably transmissible between humans as well. The potential consequences of an engineered human transmissible H5N1 strain are stunning. If the newly engineered strain were to escape the laboratory either by design or by accident and spread as widely as seasonal flu with anywhere near the current confirmed H5N1 human case fatality rate, it could endanger the lives of hundreds of millions of persons, and that the escape of a mutant, highly contagious H5N1 strain with a high case fatality rate into the population with little or no immunity could result in a catastrophe. So within the community, it's like, hey, we play with these things, but you're screwing around a little bit much. Watch out what you're playing with, because if something can go wrong, it probably will, and those things can get out. So it's bad enough we have to deal with the natural things like Ebola before we start engineering. So where that ties in with the work, again, reminders about these microorganisms and pathogens we should be concerned with. And then on top of that, I've made these ceramic for a reason. The reason why they're not glass, like they would be in a lab, is because the opacity is a metaphor for the blindness of some of the experimentation that's being done. We can't truly understand the damage we might create to, well, our species or other species on this planet. So a lot of these show the same motifs. There's Ebola on the left. It's funny because, well, it's not funny at all, really. And there's laughs again. I don't know why Ebola was the punchline. So Ebola, that image of that, this is magnified by a lot. That's showing up on the news, and it's weird to me to see that after I was dealing with it in a sculptural sense for so long. So different variations of different sizes, Erlenmeyer flask, volumetric flask, beakers, round bottom flasks, triple neck round bottom flasks. So some of these, I don't think these are the most successful. I tried different colorations. Here's where Klimt comes back into it. I love that image of death, so I played with that a little bit and made a mold and tried playing with that image as kind of an archetypal image for death. This is a series called Biohazard Jasperware, the Black Basalt Line, because Wedgwood also did this black on black run that he was most proud of, actually, of all the things he did. And that just has such a velvety richness to it. When I look at it, that I couldn't avoid it. I like the simplicity of the hue. And one thing to keep in mind is that all of these are being made out of mold, so they're pretty much a standardized size. One of the side projects I did off of this was I made this series called Anticipatory Urns, and they were Wedgwood urns, and Wedgwood did create urns in his time that address the same sort of things. The idea was making urns in advance for sort of things that might happen down the line with various biological threats that could exist, either intentional or accidental. Because time would tell us that we are due for some kind of an outbreak like that. They tend to go in cycles. So it's troubling as we have so many people on this planet and it's only growing faster. We get closer together, something like this happens. It isn't unreasonable to think that there could be significant damage to the human population. So here's a sort of context shot of how I might exhibit this. This is set like a functioning desk. Images of the urns. Now let's look at some of the drawings that I've been doing over time. Right here we've got the first one I did in the specimen series. So this is about 3 feet wide. And I was basically working with those undulating lines and forms, these sort of blistering, pulpy areas, contrasted with these veins wrapping around different, I guess, elements taken from anatomy, both human and non-human. Some of these, like I said, I like bilateral symmetry. I like that if you cut it in half, then it's more or less the same on both sides, or exactly the same. And so what I did was I made Rorschach ink blots. You all know what that is? Yeah. Using in psychology and what you see here. Well, I did that, and I saw my drawings in that, and you see where some of these have flipped. And they look, when they're set on the table from a little bit of a distance, that they are some kind of creature that's being operated on some operating table or investigation platform in a lab. So here again, I'm playing with thinner lines, contrasting weight with thinness. These are some paintings that I first did in this Blackboard series, which I'm working in now. Mixed media, there's oil paint, acrylic, chalk, Conte, marker, and that's just what I can remember. This is actually a theater curtain from a defunct theater in Milwaukee, where I grew up. And what I did was just took it and made this large blackboard composition on one side and the other. And all of that information checks out. It's all about spores. It all relates to, if you recognize that hanging fruiting body I showed you, it goes alongside that. All of that information I had to actually research. My fear was that a biologist would walk in and be like, this is all wrong. For some, that's one of those things that's important to me, is some accuracy if I'm going to make claims. So the other side. So this, you see some of the shapes that I might have used for those early biogenesis pieces. The way I came up with the shapes is that I based these spores, these mutated spores, ones that didn't come out right, on mutations in human sperm, because they're actually very similar. These are the ways that human sperm can go awry. So a sperm can have multiple heads, like a cluster, it can have no tail, it can have 2 heads, 3 flagella, all different sorts of things that would make it ineffective in doing this stuff.
ASC will be closing in 15 minutes. Those using computers are encouraged to complete their work within the next few minutes, as computers automatically shut down at closing.
Well, what a convenient timer.
Sorry.
Sorry, we don't have that. We don't have more than 15 left anyhow. It does shut down.
If you need to obtain a library card to check out materials, please apply for one at this time.
All right, thank you, disembodied voice. So again, you see the lines, and I've got this sort of underlying structure, some unknown, I guess, diagram that might go alongside it. I want that mystery where it's not so, we're beating over the head with the idea. So more of these blackboards, and I like the blackboards because, like a real blackboard, you have these erased areas. Some areas aren't fully erased. You can see some of the images, there's ghost text, ghost images, and I saw it as metaphorically like crossing the river Styx in the Inferno, where you're going across and you see these other souls that are half dead, half alive. They're neither here nor there, and I like that about the format of the blackboard, where something can start to disappear and then reemerge in a different area of its anatomy. So these are, I believe, 6 feet across or 8 feet across. So these are rather large for how much detail put in. I also worked with shadow boxes. This was the first ones I did. This was a while ago, but I've revisited them recently. Just trying different things out. This is kind of a side project. But it ties in with these drawings I've been doing, where I've been using the biohazard symbol as a compositional element. It's a flat element to this sculpture that's in the box. So I actually brought some old cards from the exhibition that this was tied to, and they're in the back if you want to sort of take home a free little print. You can grab one of those. It'll be this image. Here's some recent drawings using the biohazard symbol. I'm at a point where the symbol is too much for me now. I'm glad that I did it at the time, but I'm moving away. It's too much. I want it even further in the mystery. Some low reliefs on the wall, if it's on one side of that. I wanted to go for a sort of fossilized look. Set a map board on fire so that I have this really nice textural opening to view this drawing inside. So it's traditional and untraditional at the same time. Now this is something I did after I had graduated and I didn't have access to kilns, but I did have a bunch of these blank forms made. Some of them had sprigs low relief on them, some of them didn't. So it's making the blackboard a part of the composition three-dimensionally, how that wrapped around and behaved with these pieces. This is the newest stuff. What I really love about the black and white line drawings is they're so contrasting, and then you get distracted by the sort of fog rolling across the composition that you lose sight of, with that flattening technique, you lose sight of the fact that it is not flat. There's a figure emerging here, and he's actually pulling up this strand of the drawing, and then over here you see another figure moving out below with some alternate views. Well, it's a sculpture coming out of a board and then there's drawings on top of it. So this is a lot of mixed media. This is Giuseppe Pinone. He did this piece. I don't know a whole lot about the guy, I just know that this piece affected me when I was a teenager. He made these mirrorized contact lenses that reflected everything that he saw. And there's something so frightening and compelling about that look. And the idea of it is when people look into your eyes, they're seeing a reflection of themselves, not the person. And at the same time, Giuseppe could not see. Those blinded him while he was wearing them. So it's almost like a second sight, blindness and second sight at the same time. So I use that quite a bit. You'll see that in these last two heads I have after this. So this, I show you the in progress picture of the ceramic sculpture because it's all black, and unless you see the person, it's rather difficult to tell the detail. But essentially he's mutating. It's, I think of it more of a symbolist piece where you have the idea of the flask, as an element of a symbol, simply. And then he's bursting open with this alternated arm between, I guess, some sort of tentacle and claw, and bones, protrusions sticking out of it. So it's a violent eruption of the anatomy, some kind of mutation that shouldn't be occurring. And then you see the Erlenmeyer plaster maybe suggesting that it has something to do with human intervention in the biology. So here are some heads that I made. A lot of people see this and they think, well, he's crying. Why are you sad, Dan? Why do you have to make a sculpture crying? I don't see it that way. I actually see it as like ocular seepage. You don't cry like that. That's like you have something really wrong with your eyes. That's how I saw it. So it's not as emo as it's perceived. But this is ceramic and mixed media. That's gold luster on the eyes. This is actual gold plating. And then I played with the idea of even further mutated heads. So a lot of mixed media on there is just blistering and pussing. But keep in mind, all the while, these faces stay stoic. They really don't have much expression. I think that glowing eyes and stoic expression came from the Never-Ending Story, subconsciously for me with those oracles and the way they looked. And I like that idea. It's vacant, and it's almost Egyptian in its vacancy. Pushes you away a little bit. It makes you wonder about the mystery, and there's a detailed shot. Now, I put some postcards on the back table for this exhibition, Nocturnes 4, I believe, Monsters Strange. This is at the Projects, that's run by Leah Brown and Peter Simon. They actually gave an artist talk last year, and that was a fantastic lecture. You should look that up on YouTube. But after a gallery space, I have this 8-foot by 24-foot drawing that I just completed, called Drawing Painting. So if you're in downtown Fort Lauderdale this Saturday, there's going to be an opening where you can see this, get an actual real-time example of my work. So real quickly, because I'm right here about at time, I wanted to show you some sidetracks of my work. This gives you a certain idea of what I do, but like I told you, I'm lost in the forest with ideas, so a lot of times I just run off to the side and grab a different idea out of my arsenal and try that. So this may not even look like it came from me, some of these. This one does. Or maybe they all do. So this is playing with this form of plant life. It's all ceramic. I was very happy with the way that the glaze turned out, and this is very volatile glaze, and it usually doesn't turn out that well. So this is about 4 feet tall. I did this series of bugs in coffins, and the idea was, if we make insects the size of a human child, like a baby, something precious to us that we're just hardwired to protect, what do we think about it if we present it in a human death ritual of putting it in a coffin? And even the people who are afraid of tarantulas and leptoglossus beetles, people sympathize when they saw this in person. They just had this intimate scale to them, and I liked that about it. So that was a totally different side project. Oh, and then this is 8 feet tall, so that's,
Where are they? Where do you put them?
So this one is at my undergraduate university, along with a painting that's, I think, 12 feet by 15 feet, but I just dumped on them. I couldn't store it anywhere.
They're free? They're free? You sell them?
I wrote them off. They're early work, so we'll talk about this more. Here I was trying some more new process things like moldy clay. So I was wedging peanut material into the clay to purposefully grow a type of fungus that creates aflatoxin, which is actually dangerous for you. But look at the colors, right? And I'm a Green Bay Packers fan, so the green and gold came out. I thought that was just fortuitous. And yes, this is like hair coming off of this picture. In fact, it got to a point where it was so webbed over you couldn't see the handle. I had to kind of punch that through. So, very, very ephemeral and impermanent, but I thought I'd see what life would actually do within the clay body I was working with. These are very early. They're about 2.5 feet tall each. The idea behind them was that I liked how we were digging up these little effigies, these little Roman gods, and we didn't always know what they were for. Who was that god? Maybe it was, they had gods to everything. Maybe it was the god of tying your shoes or slipping on your toga, whatever it was. And we don't know anymore, and they're partially broken. Their history is fragmented. So the idea with these was to create some kind of distant history. We can't really truly know what it's about. And I guess that's kind of true with a lot of my work, now that I'm saying it. Here's my infant Cthulhu. I took that epic H.P. Lovecraft monster, that thing I described, squeezing its way out of a slimy tomb. It's supposed to smell like a sea of dead fish. It's just a repulsive creature, but I wanted to make it baby-sized and cute. It's like a chibi form, who are familiar with that term. I like to, I guess, rein in the scary once in a while. Some more humorous work. There were more copycats last night, Alfred, which is a quote from The Dark Knight. The idea is that this guy dressed up as Batman is trying to help, but he didn't catch Catwoman, he just caught a cat that he dressed up. So he has this look like he brought it to Bruce Wayne. He's like, I got Catwoman. And it's like, no, you didn't. Stop helping me. He's like, aw. I thought, aw. He just looks dejected. I think it's funny. I don't know. Kitsch objects on a kitsch object view through a gimmick. This was another humorous piece where I photographed teacups I found at thrift stores, and then in the computer actually separated out their reds and blues, so that if you had the old school 3D glasses, these would pop out at you when you viewed it. And this is a gigantic teacup, a really big teacup that they sell at those paint your own pottery places, which I don't understand why they exist. It's just really kind of kitschy and just overdone. So I don't like that. I don't like those teacups. I put them together with the gimmick I don't like, which is 3D, or at least that version of 3D. And don't start on me with Avatar and all that. This was an appropriation of a split cat. I found this mold at the University of Miami, and it was this Buddha with this bag of presents he was dragging behind him. It was very strange, but he was holding one finger up, and I thought, well, how would people react if I just cut that finger off and move it over one? And I glaze him with this porcelain and sell it on the glaze. So this is very traditional in how it's made, but with a contemporary twist on it. And then lastly, I don't do much functional work. When I do it, it's more on the side for myself or for friends or for sales, things like that. I just have too many sculptural ideas to focus on the functional. But once in a while, I find a way to meet them in the middle. So what you have here, this is a teapot, more like a pitcher because of how much it holds. And this whole seahorse is the actual vessel. The fin in the middle comes off. This is a docking station for it, and these are the two cups. on either side. So if you look at this image, you can see how it works. It has to have that docking station because it's like the hull of a ship. It will just fall over to one side or the other. And that one actually was destroyed at the same time as molds fell off of that shell and got smashed. I've got a picture, it's all cool. All right, well, that's all I have for you, so thank you so much for listening to me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, there's still time for it, because they actually made the wrong announcement. We still have 15 minutes if anybody has questions. And maybe you can tell us about the workshop tomorrow, if anybody's interested in coming.
Yeah, so let me backtrack to the work that's relevant to the workshop. Absolutely. Okay, so this process of adding these low release, this shallow level of detail to any ceramic surface is what I'm going to be showing. I'll also be talking a little bit about how I slip cast the form itself to maintain that regularity and the benefits of slip casting. And I'll show you exactly how to make your own little relief to put on ceramic. And this technique will actually translate to other materials as well. And I'll address that at that time.
So, do people participate, or is it like a demo?
There will be demo and participation.
I want to get a quick photo, so while they're making the announcement. Okay. Dan, you want to stand in the middle?
Do you want me to talk?